If you want to become a filmmaker, film school can seem like an obvious place to start, but is it actually worth it? My co-founder and I both went to USC Film School. That's where we met. And there are things I got from that experience that genuinely changed the direction of my life. But today, most of the top film schools cost anywhere from around $30K to more than $70,000 a year in tuition. 4 years at USC is almost $300,000, which is insane. And after actually building careers in this industry, there are things about film school that Mark and I see very differently now than we did when we were students. So before you make that investment, let's look at what film school can actually do for your career, what it can't, and whether it's worth the time and money if your goal is to become a working filmmaker. So one of the things film school really did well for both of us was expose us to movies we probably never would have watched on our own. One class Mark enjoyed was a class on Hitchcock, where he saw almost every Hitchcock movie going all the way back to his silent films. And he took another class on silent era comedy and discovered filmmakers like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. And that exposure ended up influencing the way he approached his own writing and filmmaking. Now, I had a similar experience. I went into college as an actor with background writing novels, and I started taking film classes because I wanted to understand more about filmmaking, and I ended up falling in love with it. Screenwriting classes taught me how to write for film versus writing for a novel, which is very different. And I got the opportunity to learn the nuances and get feedback. And I also loved a few of the critical studies classes where we got to watch movies and analyze them. Those black and white classic movies were exciting to watch, seeing how the filmmakers used lighting and shadows and composition to create mood and tension. And then we actually got to make films. So Mark and I were at a class together and we got to make a short together. Funnily enough, he wrote the script, I was the director, and he was my first AD. It was a great experience, and we shot on 16mm film. You don't get to do that anymore. So film school is a great environment where you're allowed to experiment and work on your own projects, other students' projects, and figure things out when the stakes are low. You get to make a lot of mistakes there, real world, and start making mistakes that cost money. There's a lot of value in that. The experience you're going to get at film school can vary enormously depending on the program. So a school like USC isn't the only option. There are public universities with film programs that are far less expensive. And there are also trade schools that may give you actually more hands-on production experience than expensive four-year programs. So practical experience is one of the main reasons you want to go. Look carefully at what you're actually going to be doing there rather than assuming the most prestigious school automatically gives you the best experience. The same is true of networking. Yes, there can absolutely be a network effect from film school. Mark and I met there, so obviously that particular relationship ended up becoming pretty important for us. We're here today because of it. But simply attending a great film school doesn't mean those relationships or opportunities automatically appear. Mark spent his senior year interning for Neil LaBute's company, which gave him exposure to the studio system and a chance to see how people at that level were working. I interned in development at Sony. I got to read a ton of scripts and learn how to analyze them for production viability. Found out I was actually pretty good at it. These experiences happened because we were looking for opportunities outside of the classroom while we were still students. So if you do go to film school, don't spend 4 years inside the bubble waiting for your career to begin after graduation. Get on sets, find internships, work on other people's projects, use the access you have while you're there, because having USC or another prestigious film school on your resume isn't going to do the work for you. And when Mark looks back at his own film school experience now, his biggest regret actually has nothing to do with filmmaking. He wishes he'd taken more business classes. In fact, Mark would argue that if you're going to go to college anyway, studying something like business and taking film classes alongside it may actually be far more practical for building a filmmaking career than just studying film alone. Because once he became a working producer, he realized how much of his career would depend on understanding the business behind the movies. One of the most practical classes he took at USC wasn't an advanced directing class or some massive production course. It was a 2-unit production management class that wasn't even part of his major. He learned how to break down a script, build a budget, create a schedule, and compare the ideal version of what a production with what was actually realistic. Those are the skills he still uses professionally. And you don't necessarily have to choose between studying film and learning the other disciplines that are eventually going to become part of your career. You can learn business, you can learn some law, you can study theater. Mark even took some acting classes, partly to meet girls, but also because he knew he'd eventually be working with actors and wanted to understand their side of the process. Some film schools are starting to incorporate more of the business side now. So if you're considering different programs, that's something I'd suggest to look for. What are they actually preparing you to do? Because learning how to make a film and learning how to build a career making films aren't necessarily the same education. We've met so many filmmakers who know how to make a movie creatively, but when they start trying to get that movie financed and distributed, they realize there's this entire other side of filmmaking they were never taught. And that's why we created the complete indie film producer system, because it's everything we wish we'd learned in film school about the business of actually getting movies made and sold. Film schools taught us critical studies. It taught us the mechanics of making a film, but it didn't teach us how to make all the business decisions that determine whether a project gets funded, whether it makes sense in the marketplace, or how to position it to actually make money, which is so important. These are the things we had to learn by actually working in the industry. And they're the things that we now teach filmmakers inside our program. So if your goal isn't just to learn how to make a film, but to get your films funded, made, and get lucrative distribution deals and build a career doing this, then go ahead and click the first link in the description below to learn more about working with us. The reality is when Mark and I went to USC, going into college wasn't a choice. In our families, we were going to college. That was non-negotiable. Film just happened to be the path both of us ended up taking. And in my case, the only reason I could afford USC was because I got a scholarship. Like, my family couldn't have afforded it otherwise. And at today's prices, there's no way I would have been able to do it. And I think this is where you really have to look at your own situation with a critical eye. Because if college is already part of the equation for you, studying film may make sense. But if you're considering spending an enormous amount of money, specifically because you think you need film school to become a filmmaker, well, that's a very different decision, because a lot of the things you might be going there to learn can be learned in other ways. Mark was making shorts before he ever got to USC. He got his hands on his dad's camcorder and an old digital editing machine and started teaching himself how to shoot and cut. Film school helped develop those skills further, but it wasn't where the process started. And even after I got there, not everything he learned about filmmaking came from his classes, right? Mark took screenwriting classes at USC, but he'll tell you he ultimately learned the craft of screenwriting by reading scripts on his own. And while he learned a lot about production by making films in school, he believes he learned even more about filmmaking from watching movies. Film school gave him access to cinema he may never have discovered otherwise, but you don't necessarily need to spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to seek that education out yourself. And today, it's easier to start getting practical experience on your own. You can work on local sets, start making shorts, shoot something on your iPhone, or learn to edit on your computer. You can watch classic movies on streamers for free and learn filmmaking techniques from YouTube videos, right? So when you're looking at what 4 years of film school will actually give you, it's worth asking, what else could you do with that money in that time? A more affordable public university might make more sense. A trade school might give you the more hands-on experience that you're looking for, or you just might decide to start working on sets. Put some of that money towards making your own films. The price of the school and the value of the education are not necessarily the same thing. There's also something about film school that's much easier to see once you've actually spent time working in the industry. The industry changes, and not everyone teaching film is actively working in the business right now. Doesn't mean they don't have valuable things to teach you. Some of the creative and cultural education we got at USC stayed with us for years, but somebody may be teaching you something that worked when they were active in the industry 10 or 20 years ago. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's how the business works today. We definitely had classes where we learned things that stayed with us. We also spent plenty of time sitting through theories and incredibly detailed deconstructions of movies that Mark and I didn't find particularly useful. Mark has a pretty simple view of that now. Times a movie is just a movie. Which brings us back to the question we started with. Is film school worth it? For me, it was. It helped take me from being just an actor and a novel writer into screenwriting and filmmaking. And I met Mark there, got to make films and study movies that expanded the way that I thought about the craft. Mark got a lot of his experience too, but neither of us believes you need film school to become a successful filmmaker. And knowing what I know now, whether I'd recommend it really comes down to what it's going to cost you. Now, if you can get a full ride scholarship, I'd say go for it. Film school is a great experience. You'll get exposed to movies and ideas you might never discover on your own. You'll get opportunities to make films and build relationships. You'll have a lot of fun doing it. Just don't limit your education to film. Take some business classes and explore other disciplines too, so you come out with a more well-rounded education. Get internships, work on sets, take advantage, everything you have access to while you're there. But if you're talking about taking on significant debt, I'd consider things differently. Think about it. 30,000 a year, 120 grand over 4 years, and graduating with that kind of debt when you're trying to break into the industry is a lot to have hanging over your head. After I graduated from USC, I worked in post-production and at a talent agency in Hollywood. These were jobs in the entertainment industry that required a college degree, and I was making something like $13 an hour when minimum wage was around like $11.50 or something, barely above minimum wage. That didn't leave me with a lot of money to pay my bills, let alone pay off a mountain of student loan debt, right? I mean, money doesn't mean a lot to us when we're young, but when you're out on your own and having to pay rent and food and transportation, and you're saddled with a huge bill the size of like a fancy car payment just to pay off student loan debt, takes away choices, and that debt doesn't go away. I don't think I would have made it had I been in that situation. So that's something to consider when you're deciding what film school is worth to you. What position is that investment going to put you in after you graduate? Because if you're going to spend 100 grand on your filmmaking education, why not take that money and make a decent micro budget feature film? And instead of coming out with this film degree and 6 figures of debt, you've actually made a film. You punched your ticket and proven you can take a movie from beginning to end. You got real world experience. You have something you could potentially sell, and you started building a track record as a filmmaker. And if you design that film from the beginning in a way that gives it a realistic path to profitability, then there's a potential to recoup some or all of that investment over time. And remember, we're talking about like 100 grand here. A school like USC costs more than $70,000 a year. Over 4 years, that's roughly $292,000, and tuition goes up each year. So if college is something you have to do anyway, you can go to film school without taking an amount of debt, then go for it. Learn everything you can and get as much as possible out of the experience. But if you don't need to go to college and you're considering spending 100K, 200K, or almost 300K specifically because you think you need a film degree to become a filmmaker, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't recommend it. I would seriously consider what that money would do more for your career if you invested it into actually making a film. Bottom line, there isn't one path into this industry. Film school is one of them, but it doesn't guarantee a career, and it might not give you a leg up on one. Fun, yes. And you could make relationships that could further your career, or you might not. So you have to do your own cost-benefit analysis. Whether you learn in a classroom or on a professional set or by making your own projects, at some point you have to just get out there and actually make films. So assess your situation and see what is best for you, whether it's going to film school or jumping straight into the industry. Go in with a clear vision, build relationships, show up, learn as much as you can, and then start making your own films. Now, if this video was helpful, take a second to like the video and subscribe. On this channel, we talk about the practical side of building a filmmaking career and what it takes to actually get independent films finance made and into the marketplace. So drop your comments and questions below, and I'll see you in the next one.